to Service, the podcast at Eden Hotel in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., right here on K Street. I'm Harper, and I'm joined by the incomparable K Street coach, Gideon Coleman.
Good to be here.
Yes, always another week. We are here right in, got a little sunshine today on K Street.
Yeah, it's been so warm. I looked at the weather forecast for the week that I decided to put some seeds in the ground yesterday.
Nice.
Yep.
Look at you starting the gardening.
Yeah.
I thought you started that in like May.
I think a lot of people do, but I actually had dinner last night from some kale I harvested quite a bit.
Look at you, man.
Yeah.
Year round. I can dig it.
Year
I can
round.
dig it. Well, we're here at Eden once again. Shout out to Eden Workshop, Eden DC, for giving us this platform to talk about service. And the question that we ask is, can you maintain culinary excellence and personal dignity? Can they rock together?
The answer is no.
The answer is no. So far, if you get a certain amount of stars, you're gonna feel like shit afterwards.
But we're pushing the envelope for the answer to lean more and more into yes territory for more and more people.
That's right. That's right. Well, one place where the food is great and the vibe is wonderful, I know we've spoken to staff there, is Citrulina down the street. What street is that on? That's in City Center, right?
Yeah, I think it's Palmer Avenue or something like that.
Yeah, and they're just creating streets.
Yep.
DC just creating streets for.
I remember when that used to be a bus stop that I would go to take buses to New York. Now it's a very high-end luxe shopping district.
Wasn't no truffles down there back in the day when it was a bus stop. I tell you that. Might have been some truffle pigs. Damn sure wasn't no $38 pastas. Chef Amy Brandwine is coming on the show at 2:00 next hour, and she's phenomenal chef, great person. We recently had lunch there, thanks to you. And she's coming on the show, and we're going to talk to her about her experiences in the restaurant business and how she's creating a culture right now that she's it's a healthy culture.
Yep.
So, what are we going to talk about this hour, my friend? Let's jump right into it.
Okay. Well, we were bandying back and forth ideas, and I said, Black History Month. Why don't we seize it by the horns? And you're like, okay, what you saying?
Let's go.
And so I shot you a number of ideas, and after a little bit of back and forth, the big idea that we came to, the one that I think needs our attention, is that you can learn all you want. You can inform yourself till the cows come home, but that doesn't change a thing about a system in place that is built largely on the backs of black workers and that offers them next to no equity.
Right.
So that's where we're going to start.
So, I guess, first of all, happy Black History Month, 2020. I know a lot of people were just really not happy with January. So, I know Cook said to me earlier, we're going to throw the whole month away, and 2020 started on Saturday. Speaking of Black History, I want to mention this dinner I was at, which actually we talked about this weekend. I was had the honor of being at this dinner. It's DMV Black Restaurant Week. This is a fundraiser for some scholarships in conjunction with the Washington Informer. I forget the name. I'm sorry, but it was a gala for the Legacy Awards, I believe is the name of it. And at this dinner, raised a lot of money for some scholarships for culinary arts and literacy, or hospitality and literacy. And they honored 4 people in the community who've been doing great work. And this was the first of many to come. It was myself, so I curated a couple of chefs, and we made a dinner. We made a dinner. I can't even talk right now. We put together a menu reflecting our experiences with the African diaspora. So it was myself, Chef Dadisi Olutosin, Chef Kima. I forget your last name, Kima. I'm sorry. I know you're watching right now. I just know you as Kima Cooks. Johnson. It's Kima Johnson. I hope that's right. But so 3 of us, and also there were 4 awards given. One was to Chef T, my friend, my brother, my mentor. One was to Chef Clifford Thomas, who's 100 years old and talked about his. Well, he didn't talk much, but there was much said about his upbringing um, in the Washington D.C. area and what he did in working with Marriott, the Hot Shots back in the day, and also Warren Thompson was honored, who's the CEO of Thompson Hospitality, and the director, I forget her position, but Kathy Hollinger of Ram W was honored as well.
Wow.
So w- w- I said a couple words at the end of, well, when it was my time.
Yeah.
And one of the things that is important for me is that we amplify our own stories as black chefs, black restaurateurs, just black people. There's a lot of desire and push to sort of be known, recognized, which I understand by, non-black publications or white media or just media in general. And I understand, being under-recognized. I get all of that. I think that in general, my call to action was we have to first do our research, take pride, and amplify our own stories. And because many times, one of the things that we talked about was many times, I've heard a couple of celebrity chefs, so-called celebrity chefs, say, well, when I was growing up, there were no black chefs to look up to. And that's not true.
You didn't see them, but that doesn't mean they weren't there.
Correct. Because if you just think about the slavery and what we did, you have to ask yourself, you don't even have to be a scholar or a historian. Who the hell you think was doing the cooking?
Right.
Like so it was blacks, right?
Well, and it's not something that has happened within the last 10 years. It's not something that's happened within the last 20 years. Couple of amazing historians that I think you can turn to if you want to start doing your research. The first one I read was Michael Twitty, but right now I'm reading Jessica Harris, High on the Hog. Thank you, DC Public Library. And what is a cornerstone of both of their narratives is that black chefs have been at the top of their game throughout the country's history, starting with Hercules, who was the chef to George Washington, and James Hemings, who was I'm calling them chefs. That was probably not the proper title, but they were the cooks in charge of the entire kitchen. James Hemings worked for Thomas Jefferson, brother to Sally Hemings, who's much better known. Hercules ran a mean kitchen, and when George Washington ended his presidency that day, he ran away, never to be found again. There was a huge bounty placed on his head,
right?
And nobody could find him after that. And he was someone who was a very well-known dandy in Philadelphia, and he had no intention of returning to Mount Vernon and after life in Philadelphia. And then James Hemings traveled with Jefferson during his ambassadorship to Paris and apprenticed there under the top chefs of the Ancien Regime in the 5 years before the revolution hit. Was an amazing chef, was eventually given manumission by Jefferson on the condition that he train up a successor, and that was his brother. And when Jefferson became president, he tried to get James Hemings back to be the first black chef in the White House. He refused and committed suicide.
That's the word on the street?
Yeah.
I didn't know that until just now.
Oh, yeah. So I name these two examples because we're talking about the late 18th century here. They didn't come out of a vacuum. They were part of a long tradition. At the time that they were at the pinnacle American cuisine in Philadelphia at the end of the 18th century, and ever since then there have been black chefs doing probably some of the best work in kitchens throughout the country.
Well, I'm going to tell you a few things come to mind when you mention Hercules and James Hemings.
Yeah.
I think that America has problems. That's an understatement.
Say what?
But how we storytell is very important, and we one day they say history's going to look back on us and wag a finger, but whenever the hell that's going to happen, I don't know. James Hemings was a slave, right?
Yep.
His sister was raped by Thomas Jefferson. Like the way, even on Monticello's website, I believe there's some recognition now of slavery. And they're very careful, been very careful about how and where. And there's all sorts of white people complaining about, I don't want to hear about that stuff, right? With Michael Twitty came under fire because of his tour, and some woman and it went viral. Some woman she don't want to hear about the slavery. I forget what plantation it was. I think he's down in
I'd like to hear about the nice stuff on the
Right.
plantation.
Right, and I think that's reflective of America's stance.
Yeah.
I think that's reflective of a lot of people's attitude towards slavery, and so we nice up the story, right? So we talk about James Hemings as if he was a stagiaire going to under Obama. We don't provide the context. He was a nigger to James Hemings,
To Thomas Jefferson.
I'm sorry, thank you, to Thomas Jefferson. He was property.
Mm-hmm.
And because his sister and because his food, however you fill in that blank, he was a hell of a good cook, obviously. You can be free, but you better lead them damn recipes, right? And it let me come back.
Not just recipes, like the skills,
the staff, all of that.
Everything you need to do to run the kitchen the way he had it before.
Right.
Yeah.
And we nice that story up, right? We say, it's like he was over after, do you want a job in the White House? No, do you want to be my property again?
Mm-hmm.
In the White House, to put this in context, Adrian Miller writes about this in his in the president's kitchen cabinet. The White House was a shithole. Until
our current president thinks that.
I mean, the kitchen. There were many people that died in the White House.
Yeah.
The cooks, it wasn't a prestigious place. Shoot, in recent memory, in the '80s, I guess Patrick Clark denied a job. He couldn't make it. That's why Patrick Clark didn't go there. He couldn't make any money. It was not a nice place to work. I've been there a few times. It's nice now. I'm pretty sure the chefs, we always want it better. But I think that the challenges, there's a couple of challenges, problems. I'm gonna call them problems with a James Hemings story, or the way we do. There's a restaurant called the Dabney, right? Jeremiah Langhorne is the chef. Praised. I never met the guy. He think he's a beard winner. The problem is when you have a place like the Dabney, right? And this is not to attack that restaurant or the chef. They love Monticello over there. That's their inspiration. That's his inspiration, for what I understand. The tables are even fashioned after the floors that were on Monticello. Here's the problem with that. If I'm a black cook and I know anything about Monticello, the tables that were serving these guests, $150, $200, whatever the hell it cost over there, were fashioned after the place where my ancestors were raped, right? And then you open up the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Beard Awards, and you see this is being praised because we section out. Where's the good stuff? Thomas Jefferson brought all this shit back from Europe, and he allowed his cooks to be trained, and he actually freed some of them, and we're coming to terms with it. No one asked how that makes me feel.
Mm-hmm.
No one, and not even just me as a black person, but as an American. That means that we're just like this woman who had a problem with Twitty's presentation. We just want the nice parts. Sally Hemings is damn near movie star up until recently. You know, she's a mistress. He raped her.
Not exactly by her own choice,
Right.
right? Yeah.
So we fantasize and we fetishize and we sort of hold up these characters. So here's the problem with all of that. We're not telling the story the right way.
Yeah.
So what's the effect? There's several effects. So what the effect is, Jeremiah gets the people that can do this research and sort of tell this wonderful story. They get the investment. I'm gonna fast forward to how this affects chefs today. They get the investment, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've been there's a certain mindset that if we cook that certain food, it's black food, it's low food, it's slave food. But if you say I'm cooking inspired by Monticello and Thomas Jefferson, you get the investment because it's a different lens coming from him than it is from me, and that's one of the small effects of telling the story in the right way. We should be telling the story of James Hemings. We should be telling the story of Hercules, but we also have to look at the effect of, like, when I go on menus, and I was in Richmond the other day and I saw something called plantation peanuts on the menu. It's like, what? Plantation peanuts. That's not okay. But it harkens back for a lot of people to like an older time. It's a word. It's a descriptor that should not be used on a restaurant menu. So anyway, here's the point. The point is, yes, we got to celebrate these figures, absolutely. And then when you have the information as diners, as chefs, you got to tread carefully. You got to understand that there's other people on the other sides of this. This is my culture. This is my history.
Well, you talked about the need for research, pride, and then amplifying your own stories.
Yeah.
So do the research, find out about people like this. Where does the pride come in, given how, Hercules, James Hemings had these amazing skills, but they were harnessed and used, without their will.
Mm-hmm.
Both of them are people who, broke away, left from the places that enjoyed their skills. Where does pride come in stories like that once you've done the research?
For me, it's resiliency and creativity. I think that when you do research on specific dishes and their origin and how the mashup of slavery, a horrible thing, but the foods that came out of it, we'll just stick to food for a second.
Yeah.
The foods that came out of it as a result of that combination happening.
Mm-hmm.
If you it's just genius. It's just some creativity, like at its highest self or in its highest form.
Mm-hmm.
Because on the back of that, talk about getting cook might be afraid to get fired from his job, right, or her job.
Yeah.
You don't do right in that era, you're gonna die. You know what I mean? Or you're gonna, like, it's some serious stuff could happen to you. So under the terms and not knowing the language and not knowing the customs and not knowing these ingredients, right?
Mm-hmm.
And having these horrible living conditions, I'm just like, wow, if they could do that under those then what we have no excuse.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I got a little mini computer in my pocket.
Right.
So for me, the pride comes in. They were just resilient, highly skilled. They were diplomats, if you will, because you had to be, you had to understand how to navigate like temperaments and sort of like the political landscape on the So it puts things in perspective for me.
Yeah. Pride. When we look at how so much of what we think of as American cuisine, a whole bunch of what is Southern cuisine, basically consists of riffs on what people who came to this continent were cooking at home in different um, places across West Africa, whether it was rice based or tuber based or
Mm-hmm.
um, legume based. Everything that we see as American today has not just fingerprints, but it's West African cuisine for
Right.
sake. um, what is the proper way to hold that with pride, given that someone could take that West African influenced cuisine and say Monticello and get investor money?
I think they're two different things. I think one is the system of America. There's a reason why someone can do that and get the investment money. Not saying that they're not talented, because I can
Yeah.
hear the people screaming, "I'm talented! I'm talented!" Everybody knows you're talented.
They are.
There's other people that are talented, as well.
Yeah.
So there are a couple of different things. But what I learned from Dr. Jessica Harris, and I was watching a panel at the Smithsonian with she, Joan Nathan, and I forget the other gentleman's name. It was Smithsonian Food History Weekend. What's so cool, and when you read her work, is it's not even everybody wants to lay claim. It's like fried chicken is my thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, sir. But it didn't originate with black people. You know what I mean? And that's just the what do they say? What do scholars say? The research doesn't support that,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they're slaves to the research. Pardon the pun, but they're that's what they have to rely on. So
Yeah.
I say all that to say, if you just do the homework and you sit there and you watch these two food historians go back and forth.
Yeah.
She did jambalaya, and I forget what Joan Nathan did. Something, I forget what she did. And the other gentleman did fish and chips. If you just look at how history and wars and conflict, how spices and grains traveled, and it is super. If you take away the emotional stuff, it's super interesting. So, people are gonna lay claim to whatever they want, and there's not much you can do about that. Yeah, I don't even know if I answered the question, but for me, I just find it really interesting once you look back at it.
Yeah, the question is, how to hold the pride. What do you do with the pride when you look at the way traditions much older than what we think of as American inform what is American cuisine.
Mm-hmm. Chef Amy Brandwine. I think you just, as a creator, you just create. You just continue to create. As if you're an artist,
Yeah.
you have to.
Come right in.
Yep. That's all right. We're live, but it's cool.
You are?
Yeah, you're gonna have a
Yes.
seat. Yeah. Chef Amy just stepped in the building, y'all.
Welcome.
She'll be joining us in a few minutes. We're going to be talking about all sorts of things. The architect behind Citrolina is here, just like a true chef. Like, let's get to work. So, so yeah, I think it's just all about creating. And at a certain point, you have to not worry about what other people say.
Yeah.
You just have to do your own research and create and tell your story.
Yeah. And we've touched on two of the pieces you mentioned, research and pride, and you talked about telling your story, amplifying your story. What does that mean to be rooted in, to have a story that's yours but is rooted in this much bigger tradition? How do we position ourselves to tell our stories?
You start where you can. Like, start many times. You might feel like, when I know me, I can speak for myself when I'm listening to these panels and I'm reading these books, and we've been separated as Black people. We've been separated from our history in a lot of ways. So sometimes when you don't have as much knowledge and history,
Yeah.
you feel a little. I've felt a little. Like, even my sister, she's a historian. She knows more than me.
Yeah.
I felt a little intimidated, and like, damn, I'm not as hip, or maybe my blackness is not as black, right? And what
It's
Zella
a
Palmer,
horrible way to go through life, right?
right? Well, it's a real feeling when you're separated, like
Yeah.
when you don't have these generations of passed down stories, and or at a certain point it just cuts off.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It just falls off the map. But I've interviewed Zella Palmer of Dillard Ray Charles University, and I posed this to her, and she basically said, everyone's story matters, right? Just start where you are. So that's what I encourage people to do. Like, start with whoever's closest to you, right? I asked my sisters and my mother, like, on text, what was your fondest food memory or something you remember about food? And it was wildly different than anything I imagined.
Yeah.
And that matters. Like, you don't have to be from the South
Yep.
and have these deep generations, this pie recipe or this sweet potato seed passed down for 3 generations. You don't need all. If you all grew up in Chicago or Manhattan or, you know, Brooklyn or, Baltimore, and 2 generations of inner city living, like that's your story as well. So I would say you start there. You start whoever's closest to you and just work backwards. It does not have to end up on a farm somewhere, because we're not going to all have those stories.
Well, I want to make sure that we land this episode on a relevant note, and I want to bring in one of the stories that I suggested to you before we started recording, and that is, I was born in LA in '79 and had the benefit of growing up with a family that had, very nice Jewish food for the holidays, but, with a big caveat. If it had been left to my family alone, I would not have had that food, and I would not have had those memories. I remember my grandmother, I think her greatest talent was being a CPA, and the best she could do in the kitchen was a tuna salad, which would go onto sandwiches. But when my mother was an infant, they brought it, maybe even before she was born, they brought in an African American woman, Nancy Millage, born about 100 years ago in Mississippi, who took care of my mom and 3 other kids, and learned from my great-grandmother, who had been born in Vilnius, all of the old Jewish recipes, so that, when a couple of generations just couldn't cook very well, the food was there. And I have that memory, spanning 4 generations, because of an African-American woman who was basically part of the family. She's the first person who put me in front of a stove when I was 3 and a half. I don't think anyone else was inclined to put me in front of a stove, but the fact that I think I can cook comes from that experience. And so I just want to use this platform to say thank you.
That's what's up.
Yeah.
We could do a whole episode on
that,
you and Nancy yourself.
Yeah, okay.
I want to give a
Happy to.
quick shout out to Steph Gans, who was with us
Hey.
last week. She says, "Hi, Chef Amy. Wish I could be in the studio too." Steph Gans, who's a former food editor and restaurant critic at Northern Virginia Magazine, joined us last week, and she revealed her identity. Bad Woman has no mask, no more.
It is like Kiss Unmasked, except better than
Right.
than the album.
Way better.
Yeah.
So we're going to take a break and get mic'd up. Chef Amy of Citrolina and Piccolina will be joining us coming up really soon in about 10 minutes. So make sure you come on back. Check us out. It's the Service of Podcast right here, Eaton Hotel in Washington, D.C.
Thank you very much.
Peace.